Call the meeting to order. We need a roll call
Yes, Golnitz,
here.
Almascati,
Here.
Burley. Renian,
Here.
Hageman,
Here.
Jones,
Here.
McAlexander.
Here.
Okay, Mr. Burley has notified me that he left for Italy today. So he will not be here today.
So we have a quorum.
Yes, you do.
Okay, the next item of business is approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to have an update on the meeting which several of us had with HRC on the agenda, or do you, if you don't, that's fine.
It might not need to be, on the agenda item, you can just discuss it.
Okay,
Any member comments is fine. I think.
Yeah, member comments.
okay.
I've got some same things to say too. So with that in mind, can we have a
I'll
motion?
move to approve. the
Second.
agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, how about the approval of the minutes from the last meeting?
Move to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, public comments for items not on the published agenda. Okay, now we're going to some presentations. The first one is Development Fund Presentation and Financing Proposal. All right. You're on.
Okay, I got some material here that I'll share. And start with these. So before I get into the funding option through a development fund, I wanted to just share a couple of scenarios that I think will help set the context there. So the first scenario that you see on this page summarizes what Jim Burley had presented. These are with the revised numbers that I believe came out of the last HRC meeting with some engineering savings and improvements. So the total cost for the project would be somewhere around 5.1 million. What I did was I took the sources of revenue or cash flow to look at what is the annual funding available each year as we invest or spend on this level of reconstruction. Took out the interest income, the interest expense for the SIV loan, and try to map this out over the next 10 years to see what that means in terms of cash available. Overall, the model works. However, when you get to 2028, you'll see the net cash flow available right at the last line showing in red that you're negative 160,000. That's a matter of timing, of course, that you basically spent all the funding available at that point. And have to either wait till 2029 to receive funds from additional tax revenue, which in a financial model is theoretical, but in practical terms means you'll be out of cash. If you go over the page, the second scenario is exactly the same assumptions. We spend on the reconstruction of the same set of roads within the same time period. However, here to plug that gap, I looked at different sources of funding, and one thing I came across was the Community Service Infrastructure Fund that's operated by the state. This is the Category B funding that's available for small towns and villages. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Ken. There was recently, I believe, an allocation that was made by the state. And as I was looking at that, the deadline for 2025 is actually June of this year to apply for a grant. So assuming we win a grant of that size of 250,000, that does address some of the shortfall, but then you're still at a $100,000 cash flow level, which I've also highlighted in red there. The impact of all that is really to say that even if you were to pursue this plan, get the grant, get the loan, it will still take you over 10 years to repay the loan back. So the question then becomes, do we get a loan of a longer tenor? Or do we get a larger loan amount to bridge that gap? Or you could do something else like look at the idea of a development fund that will address more than one challenge. And that's where I try to portray that on the last scenario. where again, I take the same set of assumptions, including the grants, and then I overlay that with the level of funding that comes in from development fund contributions over a period of time. What that does is that it allows you to sustain that level of investment and in the end, fully repay the loan by 2032. And still have funding available in a reserve for future activity.
So
Yeah.
how much of a millage increase does this include?
This assumes the one, no.
One, no.
One, yeah. Any questions on the scenarios before I get into the development plan?
So if you went to a 2 mil increase, then the, for instance, on scenario number one, 2028.
Yeah.
That 160,000 in the red would probably
Not be
not be it.
correct. But on the assumption that obviously there is no appetite amongst residents to see a millage increase. I'm trying to offer a solution here without going beyond the 1 mil.
Okay.
Is, in scenario one or two, is there a payoff of the loan?
In scenario one, you wouldn't be able to pay off the loan until sometime in, let's say, 2037, 2038. Okay, in scenario two, that's probably more like 2036, 2037. But in scenario three, you could pay it off in 2030, 2033 or soon.
And this came up during the bond presentation. Does this assume interest only with a balloon at the end?
Correct. Well, this is the way the infrastructure loan actually works.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, but there's a lot of flexibility and things that we can adjust to achieve the same outcome by looking at, taking a longer tenor loan because the state will give you up to 20 years. Here we're assuming 10. You can also take a larger amount. So we're taking 1.5, the maximum's 2. So there's more that we can do there. Yeah. Any other questions?
No, I would just offer this. I think a cash flow analysis is gonna be real important. A part of anybody's presentation.
Yeah.
So this is a very small.
Yeah, we can use this model for any of the financing proposals. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that as we consider all the tools and options we have available to look at the different financing proposals, that we also put out there the idea of creating a development fund. To share some of my thinking, I set out on the first page of the document, the situation and context, as I called it, why we should look at this. So we all know that the village has got a limited revenue base or tax base due to its small size and population. The economic environment in which we're operating, where infrastructure and operating costs will continue to rise, whether that's roads today or other infrastructure needs in the future, or things such as police and fire requirements. That's all gonna cost money, and that's not gonna get easier over time. So in order to create an alternative to simply relying on increasing taxes and borrowing as a means to raise capital, because I think both of those things will have implications both in terms of the fiscal health of the village, but also the quality of life of its residents, right? What is the proposition of living in Bingham Farms if you're gonna move here and just, be faced with a future of endless tax increases and a questionable fiscal profile for the village? So what I'm proposing is that the village considers a program in the form of an endowment that is held through a fund, a development fund that is able to sustain a lot of these activities. That can be created in a way that appeals to certain types of capital that will favor the village's small size, the historical nature of the village, and the political relevance of the village. Obviously, there are things that preclude the village, just given the income levels here, from applying for things like financial assistance and what have you, but there is capital available for other themes. If you go over the page, here I want to summarize what is the purpose of a development fund. So the idea is to create a Bingham Farms Development Fund that would support projects and initiatives that provide long-term sustainable economic and social benefits by building partnerships with private, state, and federal entities, and it becomes self-sustaining over time. As we raise capital and then allow the fund to invest that capital in financial instruments, it will become self-sustaining and will grow over time. That would then allow the development fund to provide contributions whenever needed to construction of critical infrastructure, to local land development, preserving village conditions and history, amenity improvements, beautification, stimulating the local economy, and having capital for emergencies whenever required. These themes are important, not only because that's what the development fund actually does, but also because anybody putting capital into the fund will want to know why you're doing it. Okay, we go over the page. Who are the sources of capital for this kind of fund? And each of these sources of capital will have a reason for wanting to contribute. You have local businesses, you have Michigan headquartered corporations, national corporations that are active in Michigan, utility providers, financial institutions, innovation capital, federal and state agencies, philanthropic funds, family offices, and foundations. Here, there are actual examples and precedents of certain corporations having programs in place for this kind of thing. So, for example, T-Mobile has a national small town and village grant program, contributes $50,000 to a program like this. You've got DTE as a similar program. You've got nationally something called SmartWorks America that looks at infrastructure and assistance to small communities. So there's a range of motivations and reasons. There's also here I've called it innovation capital, but there's a lot of technology-based grants, both from government as well as from private companies that will fund this kind of initiative if it supports the use of technology. So, for example, if we allow a tech company that wants to test some particular road censoring technology on our roads, they would contribute to a fund of this sort. Then you have philanthropic funds and family offices that actually have allocations to certain missions, certain communities that address the objective or annual mission that they set for that capital. And then you have political, obviously, appropriations that can contribute. And ultimately, there's a benefit to a lot of this, given that you can structure this as a nonprofit or what is a 501c3, so it becomes tax deductible to whoever makes a contribution in the fund. And the beauty of it is there's no minimum. So people can contribute as little or as much as they want, and you're able to accumulate a sizable amount of capital over time. You know, go over to the page. So here I wanted to illustrate how can you build up a fund to a very meaningful scale over time through both raising capital in terms of new money from contributors or donors, if you want to call them that, and investing that money over time to build it up into a reserve. So starting in 2025, assuming we raise $100,000 from all those different sources of capital, which is not a tremendous amount of funding, you're able to invest that. I assumed a interest rate of 3% and an investment return of 3.5%, assuming that you split the capital between what is in cash and what is invested, and that at the end of the year turns into 105. In 2026, you increase your fundraising target to, let's say, 250,000. Again, you go through the same process of accumulating those funds, investing them. By the end of the year, that turns into 372,000, et cetera. And then a lot of this is driven by what is the objective in terms of how much we want to raise every year. So if we stick to, let's say, 250,000 until 2030, by the end of 2030, you would have accumulated just under $1.6 million of funding through both what is raised and invested. And obviously that's a pool of capital that becomes available for whatever we want to do, pay off a loan or pursue other projects. So that's how the model would work. So lastly, what is required to form a development fund? I think the first thing that the council would have to do, this is something that they decide they want to pursue, is craft the fund proposition and the Bingham Farms story. So actually be able to explain to any potential stakeholder what it is that we're doing, why are we doing it, and what is the Bingham Farms story. So I would emphasize themes like the small size of the village, the historic nature of the village. Those are all things that will resonate. Then you'd have to determine the legal structure for the fund. The fund would have to be created and authorized by the residents or the council. You'd have to form a board or an investment committee that could take a number of forms or shapes, but I would say 1 chair and 4 members is typically what you'd see. And then it would initially operate through a volunteer effort and require a lot of the president's time, the council's president's time more than anybody else, just to do that initial outreach. And then when you've reached a level of about 500,000 that's been raised, you can actually hire a full-time VP or officer to help run the fund, and the cost of that person would be offset against the capital that's been raised. And that's how you'd sustain it over time with a full-time employee.
Okay, so this doesn't get dedicated to roads, it's just,
Yeah,
can be.
it can be, absolutely.
So the fund would be managed eventually with a VP or an officer or whatever. And there'd be a board of directors.
Correct.
Would it be accountable to the village council or to some, that's how these things work? Or is it independent?
The village would have to set the governance for the fund, but to maintain an arm's length kind of relationship with the village, you'd have to have its own board and governance. Yeah.
Are you aware of other like villages or cities that have this type of thing?
A lot of village, well, not villages of this size, a lot of cities do. There are municipalities all over the country that have concepts, different concepts of this sort, so they come in the form of what is either called a development corporation or development office. Not necessarily a fund, but in essence, they all do the same things. They raise funding in the form of contributions for projects or for a general pool of money that is allocated.
and grants, a lot of money from grants can go into it.
Grants you'd solicit for, I would say, projects by projects, but this is more of a general pool of capital.
Okay.
So the benefits of many people would be that it's tax deductible.
Correct.
And that would include anybody that contributes, businesses, individuals,
Individuals, yeah,
whoever
correct,
could see a tax benefit.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And obviously, if you're a business, you get other benefits, right, by attaching your name and
That's
saying you're
right.
contributing to the community.
Right.
Right, and a lot of for example, utility providers do this because it's in their interest to see communities have, the right infrastructure and good community conditions to be able to sustain their business.
Can I ask, have you been involved with anything like this before? When you've kind of Lathrop Village or anything
Well,
like that?
A lot of places have community foundations, that's pretty common, but that's sort of what you're referring to, or no?
No, I mean, I'm thinking of it more in terms of a actual pool of money that is raised and sustained over time. A lot of these foundations and offices typically go after certain initiatives or projects and try to raise capital for that. And you could do it that way too. I mean, there's, yeah.
So my experience is more with community foundations, that they can't be set up by the community. It has to be by just a group of concerned residents. And it usually funds like beautification projects and entertainment or concerts, festivals, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Franklin has something similar to this, but, that money is utilized for sort of in lieu of a Parks and Rec program or department. They actually use that money for I'm not sure exactly how this all works, but for their park program and art in the park and things of that nature. I'm not sure that this is quite apples to apples, though.
Mhm.
Beverly Hills has a fund for the park, Beverly Hills Park. Right, you're familiar, and they have fundraising events and that type of thing. But I think it's specific to the park.
I believe it is. Is there a history in the village of businesses contributing to village things?
Is there a history of, in this village?
Yes.
No,
No,
not really.
okay.
The only thing is the picnic,
We had a couple of years, we had that festival and we did have some dollars, but we're talking about less than $7,000
Okay,
a year. And we did solicit in a friendly way, just with a letter,
okay.
get a whole lot of dollars.
but just let me, your contributions to this committee are just like invaluable. I'm sure that nobody on the council knew about that bank that you told us about that could give us that loan, number one, and number two, with maybe one possible exception. People on council, I don't think that the idea of a development fund would have ever been like raised or considered, so I really appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to do this and sharing your ideas with us, but I'm gonna have to put you on the spot because I don't see anyone on the council currently who would be able to like run this, would be able to get this off the ground. I don't, and that leads me to ask, like, would you have time to do this? The council wanted to pursue this?
I would, however, I would need, for this to have credibility, I would need the president's involvement, right? Because part of the outreach will involve a lot of time that the president has to allocate to whether it's communicating or writing to people or attending meetings or whatever it would take. But I'm happy to assist getting this off the ground until it reaches a point where we can actually hire someone to run it full time.
On a number of occasions in this meeting, people have said, well, we need to be thinking about how we create a fund for the next project, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20 years from now. This starts to address at least an option to do that.
Mhm.
I agree with Kurt. It's not something I would have thought of because I don't think that way. But it is, the village is all of us are working really hard right now just to try to find a way to rehabilitate the roads. And this portion of it's mentioned, but not really planned. So I think it is an interesting possibility. And I do agree with Kurt as well. It's gonna take, there's people that do these kind of things for livings. They know what to do, they know how to do it, they know how to friendly twist people's arms.
And a lot of it is also, accessing your networks, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's networks to reach the right people.
Yeah, absolutely.
The concept of this is not project dependent, right?
It's not project dependent, but what I'm suggesting here is that this will take, maybe a year to get off the ground. If we can source a little bit of funding out of a development fund, it will help in later years toward this project. So that's why I included it in one of the scenarios that I ran, because what you'll find is things will take a lot longer in terms of paying interest and repaying a loan and whether it's a loan or any other form of funding, because we just don't have the cash flows to do it any sooner. The only way to accelerate that is to find some other source of capital in the form of this fund.
So years ago, when Kathy and I went to get trees in the median on Telegraph, that was project based. It was very specific, the Audubon fund says this is only going to be used for trees, and that was pretty simple. And we didn't accumulate any wealth with the money that came in, went right straight to tree purchases. So this is a little bit different than,
Yeah, it's a fund. It's gotta be very carefully and precisely managed, yeah.
So in your experience working with such funds, what are the costs involved for putting it together and building it? And then, as you suggest, there would be a designated person with knowledge and experience that would be a paid employee and would make money from it. What is the average income that we would pay them?
Well, it depends what is the role we're gonna hire, right? What I was thinking of in this proposal was to hire somebody more focused on the outreach and fundraising. That would be their full-time job to be able to sustain this constant flow of funding that comes into the development fund every year. That kind of role will vary in terms of pay, but it would probably be somewhere in the range of 80 to 100,000 a year.
Would it be based upon the amount of money that was collected?
It could be, obviously, a large fund would, it's not paid as a commission or percentage of the amount of money that's raised. But a large fund will attract people with obviously greater aspirations and greater aspiration for pay. A small fund, a startup fund like this, will obviously eliminate a lot of people who have other aspirations, right? But that's the kind of budget that I would set for a fund like this, once you raise the initial $500,000 or so.
And being tax-free is good too.
Right.
Could this person be working 2 jobs at once? In other words, 80 to 100 doesn't sound like a lot of money to me. But if somebody was working at 2 80 to 100 jobs for 2 different foundations or funds, essentially calling on same kinds of people, it might allow us to attract more horsepower and talent.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? You get into this whole thing with conflict of interest and
Right.
which fund are they sourcing for and that kind of thing. But if you're able to address that, yeah, why not? I mean, it's doable as long as you can address those concerns.
And it's not gonna be managed by this committee, it's gonna move right up to the council.
Yeah, and it'd have to have its own board and its own chairperson.
And what is the oversight that's provided for this from the village?
Well, the village would have to decide what is the governance over the fund. So who's on the board, what kind of reporting? And I would suggest that the reporting is obviously completely transparent to all residents, right? So everybody knows how much is in the fund, how the money's invested, how the money's being managed. A lot of public funds do that. I mean, that's not something, new that we'd be inventing here. You'd have the fund audited with third-party accountants, and so it'd all be fully transparent. But that's a very typical model.
Now, this would be also in addition to what our treasurer has done in a lot of his money management.
This would be separate from the village's budget.
Be a 501c3, that's what's gonna make a difference.
It's a separate entity,
Yeah.
legal entity.
Okay.
Correct.
So our village treasurer really would not be along, or he might audit, but not really be part of it.
No.
Okay. It's a separate autonomous kind of.
You probably need somebody in a fiduciary.
Yeah.
Right, so.
In earlier meetings, you had suggested like reaching out to try to get charitable contributions. I assume this is sort of the way you would suggest that we
Correct.
do that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
If you want to hide some income, anybody can do it.
Anybody can contribute, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can create an online portal where people can make contributions, you can solicit corporate contribution. I mean, there's so many ways to do this.
Any other comments? That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Very innovative.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
then my comment would be then, where do we go from here? Obviously, you think it's a great idea. How do we implement it? Or don't we, or do we think about it for a little bit more and then go from there? I don't know.
I suggest we move it up to the council level as fast as possible. Okay. All right, so we've got a couple options we're gonna be discussing. We're now in the phase of, we're just almost ready to turn over a lot of funding options to the council. So next meeting, we're gonna have even more. We've got 2 from Jim Burley. And we might have another one. Yep, right, hopefully. And so these 2 are ones that were suggested by the council, right? Status quo and.
Well, I think more by me than anybody else.
Okay,
And they're not really funding options. They're the first one is called status quo, basically just what would happen if we just did what we've done for the last few years. And part of the reason for this is I've talked to people in the village who told me, quite frankly, they don't think the road is that bad, and why are we having this big, to do, and why are we gonna, raise taxes to fix the roads now? So the status quo sort of assumes that we're doing this, everything that we've been doing for the past 5 years, putting aside $150,000 in funds available, getting certain Act 51 monies. Now, in Jim's proposal, he suggested the amount of $60,000 per year, which I think is is accurate over the last 2 years. But if you go 1 year back prior to that, it was only like 15,000 for that year because because the roads were deteriorating, we had to take on a project. And my assumption is that if we're not improving the roads, it's more likely that we're gonna have more of those projects. So I cut it from 60,000 to 50,000. The results in the chart that we did, which I believe, and by the way, kudos to our treasurer, Phil Patton, who helped me do this, because I'm no good with spreadsheets and everything, but the bottom line for a status quo option with the selective rehab program was that the shortfall that we had in funding increases by like $725,000 if we just do the status quo through 2028. So that, you know, I mean, that's an option certainly, but
Not a lot of money.
it will increase our deficit, if you will, by that amount over the next 5 years. Assuming all these assumptions hold true, which of course, you know, nobody can guarantee. The second option then was, HRC had mentioned to us that they had that if we started putting money towards maintaining the roads on a regular basis, rather than what we're doing now, which is just filling potholes, you know, cleaning the roads from the snow and putting down salt and maybe like if there's one section that needs emergency work, doing that. They suggested a maintenance program. And during our meeting with them, they talked about that a little bit more. And it turns out, I thought going into the meeting that they had like some sort of program in mind that as to how to do this. And it turns out that what they did is there was a state agency that had like a program that you just plug the numbers into the program and it spit out a number as to what generally the amount would be. And that's all they've done. They haven't like done any kind of analysis of what it would actually cost or anything like that for our roads. Would you agree? And the other thing that they indicated was that they felt it was only that kind of a program was only helpful for roads that were, well, that's not the right way to put it, that you got your biggest bang for the buck for that kind of program if you use it on roads that were already in good shape. They said it was kind of counterintuitive, but they said if you like tried to do it on Bristol Road, you know, it wouldn't be near as helpful as it would be on a road that was already in good shape. So their suggestion was that right now, the only roads that we have that would be in good enough shape to get the maximum benefit for it would be Brooks Lane, Coach Light, and Old Stage. So this option is, I think, maybe a little less viable than I thought it was going into that meeting. If you look at it, it would actually increase the amount we're short, because the $150,000 that we're currently putting aside for the roads, we're actually would be spending on, you know, keeping the roads up. Having said that, I'm not sure that we would spend $150,000 in the first year or two of this if we're only looking at, you know, 2 or 3 roads. So maybe that deficit wouldn't be as big, but that's basically the way I see those two options. I'm not suggesting that I think those are the best options. I'm just saying that that's what we got after the meeting, as to like 2 options that we could present to council: status quo and road maintenance. And then if you let me blather on for just another minute or two, the other part of the meeting that we had, what talked about Jim Burley's proposal, which was option 3. And, you know, what we were tasked to do with at that part of the meeting was to try and figure out whether his major assumption, at least in my view, is major assumption that we didn't need to do a complete rehab of Bristol Lane and the courts was feasible. And, you know, our, consultants, HRC, would absolutely, they did not change their opinion that we shouldn't go that way with those roads. Having said that, they also said, that, you know, it's our money and we can do what we want. And if that's the way we decided to go, then they would do the engineering accordingly. Would that be a fair?
No, that's perfectly fair.
Summary of
yeah,
that?
yeah.
And just, you know, I think Jim is still convinced that the way to go is his option 3. However, he, I think, based on their analysis, he also came up with an option 4, which we all got sent. Which eliminates that assumption and does go for the long-term rehabilitation. So we have like an option 3 and an option 4 that we could present to the council. Option 4, obviously, you know, is, you know, more expensive and 2 mills instead of 1, and it takes longer and that sort of
And the
thing.
loan is involved, right? Infrastructure loan.
It include, I think both of those
Both of them,
still
yeah.
include
Yes.
infrastructure.
So, I mean, it's just a differential between your case 1 and case 2, where you don't really have an infrastructure loan built into it, right?
His, I think both have infrastructure loans. Mine,
Your stuff.
yeah, my option 1 and option 2, we're not fixing the roads. You know,
Oh.
option 1 is status quo for 5 years, and then whoever's on the council then gets to figure it out, or option 2, which is, you know, we are at least maintaining the roads so that hopefully, or at least several of the roads, so that they don't get worse as we wait that, you know, for a time period.
And the waiting is only really to accumulate enough money then to be able to go after and do a pretty substantial fix of the road. I'm making that assumption.
Well, I would assume that you would save as much up as you could, but
Right.
like I said, it looks to me like it would be, you would have a bigger shortfall
You would,
if
yes.
you waited than if you do it now.
Yeah.
If I could just add a couple of comments, because I was in the meeting with Kurt, Jim and I met with Ken and the HRC folks. I was also concerned because we were proposing something, in Jim's proposals, we were proposing something that seemed contrary to what the engineers had said. They didn't even give a recommendation to do a selective rehabilitation on those particular roads. I think Jim brought out a lot of really interesting points is, first of all, how much money do we have? And how much money are we really willing to spend? And I think all those things come in consideration. The end result for me was that the consultants basically said, look, they described it as putting too many layers of roofs on a house. At some point, you're doing this mill and fill, whatever you call it, on top of asphalt that's on top of poor soil conditions. But after all the discussion, and now Kurt actually kind of whispered it at the end, is that I think I felt better about going with that option than when I went into the discussion, because at least there was an understanding of what to expect if we took that route. So it satisfied a lot of what I had in mind, and therefore I thought it was a successful meeting.
Well, what we want is just these proposals. It doesn't matter if we have a majority that supports them or not, just have them out there so the council can review them. And I think we're getting really close.
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate for public comments in this or no? Or was that?
Go ahead.
Well, what keeps coming back to my mind is sort of along the line of what Kurt was talking about is, I keep asking myself, and I hope you do too, are all these improvements really necessary? I started my career in city government, city of Southfield, working with Hubble Wealth and Clark, great outfit, highly regarded. But their job is to fix stuff, you know? Not that they're not objective, not that they don't take direction, they do. But I know roads deteriorate, but it's depending on weather and traffic. Now, looking at Bristol Road, for instance, last month, my wife and I she was dog sitting, we were walking dogs down there several times. In a half an hour, walking down, not one car passed us, not one. The next time we walked, 2 cars passed us. I thought, must be rush hour. And I keep asking myself, why do you need to fix a road that nobody uses? And it's like, I don't have an answer to that, but there's some downsides to improving roads. Speed obviously increases right away. Everybody knows that. And unlike Franklin, the Franklin people on 14 Mile between Franklin and Inkster refused to let the county pave that road because they knew it would destroy the neighborhood. We don't have that. All our roads are paved, so it's not gonna be, but still, speed will increase. But lastly, and it's the idea of fairness and cost. I live in Bingham Woods across the street. We pay our own road construction, maintenance, snow removal, etc. In the last 7 years, that's almost been $1 million. $350,000 for concrete curbs, catch basins, etc. $80,000 a year for snow removal and salt. We didn't come to the village and say, hey, we got this great bill, you want to kick in some money? And it's sort of the same thing in reverse here. And if I lived in the middle of Bingham Farms, I'd have a different opinion. But we don't use any Bingham Farm roads. 13 Mile is a county road, Lasser's a county road, 14's a county road, Telegraph is a state road. So I hope you will keep that top of mind. I mean, we're not the only private subdivision. And this is going to be a hell of a challenge to try to finance this kind of a deal. There's no question about it. I think the development foundation idea is a great idea. Not just for roads, but these kinds of communities, these villages with no tax base, there's no business tax base here to speak of. I mean, who are you gonna go get contributions from? You'd have to go to Ford, GM, the big corporations, and having worked in that area, I know. But I can't see, if I was on the village council, how would I call the people up across the street and say, hey, we're gonna raise your taxes, you can pay for our roads. I hope you'll, in your figuring, keep that in mind. As I understand from the excellent newsletter that Ken put out, there's 5 private subdivisions representing over 50% of the taxpayers. So Bingham Farms is unfortunately in a very unique position and challenging position, no question about it. And looking at all these alternative financing methods is great. But I think you need to think about that half the community is private stuff. Are we really going to be able to ask them to kick in to fix the other part of the roads? So thanks for listening.
Annie did a little expose. You want to kick in?
Wait a minute, Mr. Chair, when someone wants to speak, you gotta ask them to give them their name and address.
Oh, okay.
All right,
So-
Mike Heck, 30805 River Crossing. Bingham Farms.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure, sorry.
I'm sorry. But Annie did an expose on Bingham Woods, and your conclusion is?
Well, Bingham Woods was the only one I had access to what they spent. There's a Bingham Point, there's Outland Trails, and then there are a good number of private roads that aren't condos, that are single family homes. And you guys have all that stuff, but it is slightly over half. The taxpayers and voters, I did do a memo for this group to try and capture a lot of what you're saying. And I tried to suggest some tools that maybe the council would look at to try to tweak this and make it a little more fair. It's a problem that developed over time. I don't view it as anybody's fault. Having been a planning commissioner and a council member in Beverly Hills, I enthusiastically supported developments that came before me that looked like they were good for the village and were consistent with our plan. And if they had a private road, at the time you thought, this is great, won't cost the village anything, and you approved it. What we didn't think of, it takes 20 or 30 years, and you have to do a lot of them before you get to the point we're at here in Bingham Farms. Beverly Hills never reached that because it's a tiny, tiny percentage of private roads compared to the village roads. But I can't second guess anybody for approving these developments with private roads, but here we are. It's accumulated to the point that we have a conundrum. And I tried to come up with some tools that were talked about and in some cases implemented in Beverly Hills to try to address the real inequities. We don't get traffic enforcement on private roads. If somebody's blowing stop signs and speeding down the residential streets, police don't help you. It's a private road.
Yeah, I talked to the police chief about that last week, and he said, Mike, I've told you before, we can't do anything
Yeah.
about it.
They can. One option
You
is.
need your own police force.
We're gonna hire Tony.
Anyway, it's a complicated situation and I hope council will look at it. I put my memo together for you guys to get it on the table so we could talk about it. This many smart people in the room, you'll probably think of things that I did not think of. And we can put it together and put it out there. This to me is the time for Bingham Farms to address this. We keep kicking this can down the road, it's probably.
Just, Mr. Chairman, one of the comments you made, Tony, was the concept of trying to see if, in doing the roads, we could leverage any road projects that any of the private roads had by pairing them with our projects so that maybe the condo association or private road, whoever it was, could get a cost break.
That's one tool.
Right.
Yeah, and Beverly was open to that as well. And it's a win-win because the bigger your project, the less it costs you.
I'm wondering if
There are economies of scale, so the village would benefit. If there's a consistent project going on, say in Bingham Woods or in Bingham Point, and you can fold that in, everybody's gonna pay a little less per unit. And that would help everybody.
I'm wondering if maybe you think, or this committee thinks that maybe trustee Hageman and I ought to take this, at least that part of your idea to the village council at their next meeting, just as a way of like, if in fact we wanted to try and do that, it seems like we ought to be talking with the condo associations, we ought to be talking with the private roads now as opposed to later.
Yeah,
And I have no idea whether you would probably have a lot better idea than I would in terms of whether like Bingham Woods is gonna do their roads in the next 5 years or whether Bingham Point is or whatever, but it seems like we might wanna begin that work sooner.
find out what they have
Right,
on the table or in their future.
right. And would you be willing, since you've done this before, to like spearhead that if the council said, yeah, we'd like to go ahead and do that? Would you, like?
I can work on that,
And
sure.
Ken could give you like names of who to call and.
They have contact information.
Yeah, we need the president of the HOA to approve it.
Right, okay, so maybe trustee Hageman and I would take both the development fund idea and your idea to the council this month to see if they want to go ahead with that or just wait until we're done. Because it seems like some of the stuff we already work, if they're gonna do it, the sooner we start, the better.
Right?
Yeah, I want to get all these options to the council as soon as possible.
Right.
Is there any argument to be made that everything should be taken at once though, rather than piecemealing it?
Kurt
I don't
thinks
know.
that's the way to do it.
You would know.
Well, my personal opinion is that some of these things, if we're gonna do them, the sooner we start on, the better. So I would. And if we take them to the council and the council doesn't want to deal with it until the end, then they can tell us they don't want to deal with it until the end. So I would take both of your suggestions. It would just be my opinion, but I'm just one member of this group and if the group decides otherwise.
I would agree with that.
And to add even a little more to that, in the past, when we have done some road projects, we've also worked with Beverly Hills
Yes, I understand that.
and coordinated that. So in that coordination, maybe could all three be done? So you've got,
The more the merrier.
yeah, so
Okay.
now you've got yes, we're paying Beverly Hills, but because we have expanded the project, as we know, things come down. So that's another possibility there too.
Right, that's to everyone's
Yeah.
benefit.
The Beverly Hills thing is a little bit different, but we just hire their public works group to do jobs for us.
Yeah. But lots of times
It's not
we'll
like a
hire,
merger or
and,
anything.
yeah, lots of times, so if they're doing a project, we will then piggyback onto that project.
We do contract with Beverly Hills for general DPW stuff, but they don't do major roads.
Right.
That's a
Right.
bid out project with a major outfit that comes in. That's what.
It's more track and fill and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Pothole fill and so forth, yeah. I would also like to state too, that we talked about letting roads go. If any of you have ever been down Timber Trail, that's what happens to a road if you don't touch it at all. So if you've ever walked it or anything, that's literally what, that was done 2000, no. That back then, I think, when did we move out here?
81.
It may be 81, so maybe around 85, it was whenever the roads were originally done. That road, so it has never been touched for all those years, just to kind of give you an idea, if you don't touch a road, that's what happens. And there's very little traffic, there's no, buses aren't even allowed on that road, so it's. You know, although we have suggested that that becomes just literally just a trail.
Kurt,
So
to answer
that's
your
up to
question,
the-
we wouldn't be doing any major road stuff for 10 years probably.
Bill?
Okay,
And I'm very sympathetic with the condo owners, and I completely understand, because you're covering the costs. But at the same time, the comments that I'm getting, that people that come to me and are concerned about this, are, if you look at your tax bill, it lists where the tax monies are going. I put 2 kids through school. They spent maybe collectively 5 years in the public schools. Beyond that, I was paying tuition. We pay for the library, Baldwin. The DIA. The police department locally, that doesn't even service speeding on the roads. And I mean, you can't just cherry pick what you want to support in taxes and what you don't.
We're
And I
being
think
taxed at
part
the
of it
same
has-
rate, that's the point, we're paying the same tax.
Yeah.
We're just
Right.
getting less benefit.
Right, but if you look at the long range goal is to maintain a value. And once the streets are not maintained, the value for the village decreases. Then the values of even homes can decrease. So I think it's part of that infrastructure. It's like spending money on the sewers and the water lines. We had to do repairs on the main water line, which is at the front of my home. But that's 40 years. We've had 40 years of service out of that. I'm sympathetic, but yet I just don't want to see the village go into a negative spin by not maintaining itself either.
I agree with that, I agree with all of that,
Yeah.
but there have to be some equities, and there. You gotta have the votes to support it, and the situation right now is that you probably don't have. it.
Yeah,
okay.
Okay,
Kathy, could you state your name and address for the people that might be watching at home?
Kathy Machikian, 32724 Bingham Lane.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry,
Well, I just, one responsive comment, and I agree with much of what you said. I don't agree with all of what you said. If Sager Road became one giant, sorry to use you guys. If Sager Road became one giant pothole tomorrow, I don't think it would adversely affect the value of my house in Bingham Woods by $1. You know, I mean, and that is different than a sewers throughout the system. It would be different, if it was 13 Mile Road. 13-mile road, then I could see, 14-mile road, I could see, but. But having said that. You know, I'm not sitting here. Once every 2 weeks to try to come up with a proposal that's not gonna pass. I want something that's gonna pass. That we can come up with as good a plan as we can, that's as fair as possible to everybody. Private roads and public roads, and I'm not even sure that there is a perfect plan, but we have to do the best we can to come up with something that. Number one is gonna pass, and number two is gonna fix the roads.
I think if we give them 2 or 3 options, regardless of way you're leaning, they can pick their own.
Yeah.
If it goes to, a vote of people, they can pick whatever they want.
Right.
So I think having as many options out there as possible would be fair,
I agree.
not have a slam dunk, we know it's gonna pass. You just put them out there.
And that's why I was also thinking that I like the idea of having anywhere from 3 to 5, maybe even more than that, if that's what we decide, but at least 1 or 2 of them is if something has to go for a vote. So 1 or 2 of them at least would be a fallback to say, okay, it doesn't pass. Now what are we gonna do? Well, we have still 1, 2, or 3 options. Which is kind of what one of these is proposing that, okay, we go with 1 bill increase. Which I don't know if we'd even have to go for a vote for something like that, but then we now have something that we can fall back on. Whereas if we wanna go for 2 or 3 bills, I don't,
So all
It
kinds of
depends on-
combinations,
yeah.
all kinds of combinations that can, and then we'll probably end up with 6 options. Maybe.
yeah, even though they ask for, I wouldn't
Not
bother me to
being
give more
status
than
quo.
5, yeah.
And the more the merrier, I think. Right. Okay. Any other,
Where do we go from here, We got some great options here, that's for sure.
We can,
okay, so
And
we're-
I think, again, going along with what Don said, that in putting together then this other plan, this development type of idea, then those monies go back to offset. And because it's almost a philanthropic kind of organization, if that organization decided, okay, Bingham Woods needs some extra money, here you are. So that,
Or if you wanted to reduce the millage.
or use it to reduce the millage, yeah.
okay, have we run through the agenda? Except for member comments?
I'm good.
You got something?
I just wanted to ask a question, and that was a couple of weeks ago. One of the members of our community presented a proposal and then was gonna come to the next meeting and COVID hit and she couldn't come to the meeting. And I just wondered whether, I mean, as I recall, her proposal, it was different from what we've discussed in some of these other ones. And I just wondered whether that member, if she wanted to like come back with that proposal or not.
Kathy Hageman, 32671 Bingham Lane. I know the procedure. No, it wasn't really a proposal. It was just a scenario that I developed. Taking the 12 mil for doing the roads and then just putting it out into a time frame that it could be done. And it was based on a 3 mil increase, which during the progression of this committee, looks like that's a no-go anyway. So it was just an example to show you, just to get a discussion going on it. That's it.
Thanks. No further comments.
I'm good.
same here.
Just a question for Kevin. Are you able to, I guess, just give us a view on what are we doing regarding this category B funding? Are we applying for it? Are we waiting for the council?
I have actually spoken with Brad Shepler, who knows the woman that maintains or runs that operation, that. Can't think of the exact acronym.
Yeah.
And yes, but I don't want to put the cart before the horse.
Sure.
So that's where I'm kind of waiting. But Brad is going to speak to the. According to what I have read, Again, that grant, which is the category B grant, which is targeted to smaller communities, rural communities, or communities, smaller or rural communities. It typically is awarded to communities that are more distressed. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. So
Yeah,
it's worth trying.
I think so. I mean, look, this is what I got off of their site. The only requirement it says here is population of 10,000 or less
Mhm.
per the 20,000.
Yeah, I have this.
Right.
I have this.
So,
Yeah.
given that the deadline is June 12th, I just wanted to
Mhm.
make sure it's on your radar.
Mhm.
That's
It
all.
is definitely on the radar.
Okay, covered. My comments, and I asked Ken to do this, and it's included with your, packet, is to sort of review what this committee has gone through since its inception. Because and you'll see here, there's a lot of information that's been presented, and it was evident when we started this committee that some committee members had been presented some erroneous information about the roads. And so what I wanted to do is get everybody on the same page with all these experts that know all this information to present to the whole committee. So I don't know if you read through it, but it's pretty extensive as to where we were and where we are now in terms of knowledge base. So just kind of appreciate what we've gone through here in terms of fact finding, and it may have seemed a little tedious for some of us that we wanted to jump right in and start working on projects, but we didn't have the knowledge base to do it. That's the reason why we went through. Okay. I'm done. We have a motion to adjourn.
Also moved.
Okay. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.